Hey guys, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and this is your coronavirus tech news for Saturday, April 18th of 2020. And we have two different stories here that both complement and contradict each other, and I think it's very interesting because, quite frankly, a lot of us don't listen, but we're also listening. And so here's what's going on. The first one comes from Wired, and they have an article entitled, "A Lot of People Don't Even Know They Should Stay at Home," which seems kind of mind-boggling given that we are in the middle of a pandemic. Now, basically, even as state after state has issued orders for their citizens to stay home, many actually have not been getting the message. States that have had instructions in place for weeks, consistently 15% or more of citizens seem to misunderstand basically what they're supposed to do with this order. Now, in some states, more than half of the citizens seem to be missing this message. Now, this comes from Thomas Goetz. He's the author of this Wired article, and he teamed up with Matt Mohebi, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and they did a survey. They asked more than 100,000 people across all 50 states a simple question. Do you live in an area that is currently under a stay-at-home order due to the pandemic? Now, they use Google surveys, and basically they did 100,000 people, or rather surveyed 100,000 Americans between March 22nd and April 5th. The survey appeared basically to internet users on more than 1,500 websites. Google then weighs that sample to match the overall population with the Census Bureau data. Google Surveys is a known good entity for doing surveys like this. And so they asked respondents whether they live in an area under a stay-at-home order due to the pandemic, and the respondents could answer yes, no, or I don't know. It's pretty simple. The results show that in many areas of the country, significant parts of the population do not understand the directives they've been given. So, for example, in Arkansas, which when they wrote this article a couple of days ago, was not under a state order to stay at home, more than 60% of the population answered yes or I don't know to the question. In Utah, where the orders have been issued only regionally, meaning pockets of Utah, nearly half could not actually provide the correct answer. And so similar confusion was shown in Wyoming, Missouri, Alabama, and South Carolina, where the governors have been slow to act or have been inconsistent with their communications in terms of, are we going to do this? Are we not? Yes, we are, but it's not official, that kind of thing. Now, in each of these states, about half of the respondents seem to be confused about whether they were actually subjected to a stay-at-home order. In Texas, where Governor Greg Abbott issued a stay-at-home order on March 31st, but kind of hedged whether it was an actual order, 1/4 of Texans misunderstood the instructions. And even in New York, where Governor Andrew Cuomo has basically been one of the governors in the United States that has been on the forefront of we're going to lock this down, stay home, blah, 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 about 25% of New Yorkers appear to be missing that message. That's mind-boggling. Now, to be clear, they are not surveying people that are willfully disregarding instructions from their elective governments. We have seen in the last, let's say, 72 hours or so, a whole swath of populations in like Michigan, for example, where they are having protests to extending stay-at-home orders due to the pandemic. But I think overall, this shows what happens when governments don't coordinate their message. We've seen many states here at odds with the federal government, and I think that has sown a little bit of chaos, which is proven by this theory, this survey. So we've got, let's say the federal government saying, oh, they're going to be the optimistic, and it's going to be great, and we're going to get, back to work X amount of time, and that didn't happen. And then many states, like New York, for example, said, you know what, we're not going to listen to the federal government, we're going to lock this down. My own state, Illinois, was one of the, I think it was the first three, New York, Illinois, and California, to basically go off book from what the federal government was saying. And I think that has been sowing confusion. And so I think the default thing here is, when in doubt, stay home. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and we are trying to, quote unquote, flatten that curve, trying to quash this thing, and staying home and isolating and social distancing actually really does help. Now, here's the interesting thing. Bloomberg has a different take on this because they have new data from the U.S.'s Center for Disease Control and Prevention that shows that Americans have been responding quickly and thoroughly to directions from federal, state, and local leaders. Here's the contradiction. And basically, they are apparently doing everything from washing their hands to, cleaning high-touch areas, avoiding the workplace. And some people are actually giving up income to stay at home. Now, these measures appear to be paying off, according to the CDC, because it's slowing the spread of the disease. Now, some of the earliest models of the U.S. outbreak suggested that as many as 2 million Americans could die from COVID-19. Now, the success of social distancing with everything else that I mentioned is actually adjusting the model, which is now suggesting fewer than 70,000 Americans will die, which is obviously a much better number. Nobody wants to see 70,000 die. That is way better than 2 million, and hopefully that keeps lowering down to zero. And according to CDC Director Robert Redfield, and I quote, "That's remarkable. The American public listened to the message, protect the vulnerable." Now, the models that they were using with these 2 million underestimated the extent to which Americans would embrace the recommendations and engage in social distancing. Again, this is according to CDC Director Robert Redfield, and he said this in an interview. Now, the original estimates for compliance were put around 50%, meaning if 50% of the general U.S. population complied, we'd have around 2 million deaths. But according to Redfield, and I quote, "Compliance to the message has been in excess of 90%, which is why the model can be adjusted down to, let's say, 70,000 or hopefully less." Now, so here's a takeaway that I have from both of these. At least this is my takeaway from this. Now, assuming both articles and surveys are accurate, despite the disparity in public orders or directions, meaning that ping pong that the federal government is playing with state and local governments, Americans have actually been smart enough to listen to the news and social distance, or at least self-isolate. And that is what's bringing these models down. That is what's bringing that potential high-end death toll way, way down. And so I will leave you with a meme that I saw the other day that I think sums this up perfectly. There are two things that will make this pandemic worse. Number one, how dense the population is, and number two, how dense the population is. So take that for what it's worth. That is your coronavirus tech news of the day. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, guys.